In the first reading, St. Peter and the apostles replied to the court officers and the Sanhedrin, "We must obey God rather than men." This is a strong statement of faith when they were asked no longer to speak of Jesus. It brings a great question to us. How do we know if we are obeying God? Some might say, well, of course, that voice in our head that we know that comes from God, when we follow that voice, then therefore we will be obeying God. Perhaps. But how do you know that voice in your head is God's voice? That's the question. The church understands that there's several ways that we can more clearly define and say that I'm pretty sure this is God's voice. Number one, that voice will be in congruence with the teaching of the church, the magisterium of the church. What we call is the body of teaching that's handed by Jesus to his apostles and passed down from bishop to bishop, all collected together. That's what we call the magisterium. And that body of teaching is always going to be true. What we call the deposit of the faith. When we follow that voice that is in congruence or unified with that body of teaching, then we can know that that is probably us following the voice of God. A contrary example, this happened regularly in the 80s. Someone would have an epiphany, an understanding that abortion is killing humans. And of course, we've had tens of millions, probably close to 100 million Americans who have been killed through abortion. Many, many millions through in vitro fertilization. And around the 1980s, there were people that said, God told me that I need to wage war against those who are killing babies. Well, no, that's not God's voice. To do harm to another is never the voice of God, right? So we always look at it from the perspective of the teachings of the church and follow that voice that's in congruence with the voice of the church. Number two, based on our state in life. If a married woman with small children, I see some babies here, how beautiful to have babies. If you are a married woman and you have several small children and you hear a voice in your head that says, go to Zimbabwe and be a missionary, leave your family behind. Is that the voice of God? Absolutely no. Now, if your husband gets the same voice and you're supposed to go together as missionaries, well, perhaps, right? But your state in life as a married woman or as a married man, that has to take priority of any kind of thought that comes in our head. And God's voice is going to be in unity with that first call, that vocation as a married man or woman. Likewise as a priest. Or if you've made promises like to consecrated life or a third order or to be a missionary. God's voice is going to be in union with that call and that state in life. And if you hear that voice in your conscience and it's in union, then you can trust it the more. Finally, having these things, and that voice comes to you and asks you to do something special, and you check with a trusted friend, and all these kind of come into agreement, and it's that thought that you regularly know is from the Lord, then we can have a certain level of trust and say, God is asking me to do something special, and I will obey his voice. Certainly, Peter and the apostles understood this in a very real way because they walked with Jesus for 3 years and they couldn't help but obey his voice. So may we, when we hear his voice, and respond to it.